My name is Steve Hoge, and I am an attorney working for Medtronic. I support a business that moves a lot of patient data. Our pacemakers, for example, they're implanted in a person's body, but we have technology that takes data from those pacemakers and sends it to a database that we maintain so that their physicians can access that data and use it for their patient care. Prior to working for Medtronic, I worked for FICO, where I did a lot of work with privacy, data, and security. That's a little bit about me. I'd like to know a little bit more about my audience. If you provide a product or service that either accesses or moves your customers' data, please raise your hand. All right. For the rest of you, you all have vendors that access or move your data, so my comments will apply to you as well because you have to worry about your vendors. If you have customers or want to have customers in the healthcare business, please raise your hand. All right. For those of you who aren't in that business, I apologize. My comments will focus a little bit heavily on the healthcare business because that's where I'm at right now. However, the principles apply to any business. So we're going to talk about vendor cybersecurity, whether you are a vendor or whether you have vendors. And I'm not going to belabor this. My colleagues did a good job of scaring the heck out of me and probably you as well. There's a lot going on out there. One of the things that they didn't mention is there are what are called hackers out there, people who are generally motivated by improving the cybersecurity of products and services. And they will go in and work on a product or service to see whether they can hack it. And usually they will approach a company and say, hey, I did this, do you know you have some vulnerabilities? If that company is not responsive, or if they don't approach the company, they may well go public with that information because they want people to be aware of the vulnerability, and it helps them get a reputation. It helps them generate more business because most of them have to earn an income, so they want people to hire them to help them identify vulnerabilities. One of the things that happened was, and it just took hacking and its effect to a whole nother level, is a cybersecurity hacking firm did an evaluation of all the medical devices and determined that one of the companies, in their opinion, had inadequate security. And they teamed up with an investment banking company which sold the manufacturer's stock short, meaning they bet against that stock going up. And then they went public with the findings of the hackers, giving advice that they felt that this publicly held company would have a difficult time competing in light of this. And not surprising, that had an effect on the stock. So I raise that because that took the whole cybersecurity to another level. So with everything that's going on out there, what's going on within companies? These are some of the risks that at least healthcare companies have to deal with. Patient risks. If something is hacked or is hung up by ransomware, they may have to stop therapy. They may have to change settings for the patients. There may be delay in care. Hackers may get access to the patient records. We've seen that. Or the healthcare providers may lose confidence in a vendor's device. There's all kinds of legal risks out there from regulations, HIPAA, FDA, In Europe, something called the General Data Protection Regulation. The Federal Trade Commission gets involved. There can be litigation from plaintiffs. You can have breach of contract. It's good to be aware of that. Fortunately, most of the regulators have had the wisdom of talking generally about having good security. So the standards that Mike was talking about, those are the things that are really more important for you to know as a practical matter, because as you interact with other businesses on cybersecurity, that is going to be the language that other cybersecurity experts are going to speak. Those compliance with those kind of standards, application of those standards to your products or systems, those are the kind of things that your customers are going to look for, or that you should look for from your vendors. Reputation risk. That's becoming more and more important, certainly for publicly held companies. Because if a hacker goes public with something, and it may or may not be true, but if they go public with it, your customers are going to ask a lot of questions. They're going to perhaps lose confidence in your products and services. So in response to this current landscape of publicity and heightened awareness of cybersecurity, this is being looked at the board of director levels, the CEO levels if it's not a publicly held company. And when you see companies losing market cap because of publicity around a cybersecurity hack, it gets their attention. And then they talk to the CEO and say, make sure this doesn't happen to us. And then the CEO talks to the VP. And pretty soon, there's a lot of people involved and a lot of people looking at it. Because it does affect so many things in a business. Stock price, customer relationships, your business operations. If you have ransomware, you've got a problem operating. It may affect valuable confidential information. There are state actors that will hack and look for intellectual property. The media, appropriately and sometimes not so appropriately, are reporting on this. And I'm a big fan of journalists and media. I think they're important, but they don't always get it right. But it's a great story, so they are going to be reporting on it. That's not the kind of publicity that your company wants to have. And it's not the kind of publicity that your customer wants to have. Government, politicians, for good reasons or perhaps not so good reasons, will find this as an issue and will raise the sense of it. Regulators are getting into the act. The FDA in my business has really ramped up their level of expertise in this and are making sure that their device manufacturers are doing more and more and more to ensure that medical devices are secure. Homeland Security, they have a division called ICS CERT, which their job is to publicize security breaches. The theory is, if we all know what's going on, we can work together to fight this scourge. If everybody hides the fact that they've been hacked, other people don't know about it, and they're more vulnerable. So one of the things that Homeland Security will do is, if they're contacted by a hacker or otherwise become aware of a security vulnerability, they'll look at it, and they may well notify all affected parties. So the word's going to get out there in a lot of different ways. So people are taking a lot of time and effort looking at this. So real quickly, from a healthcare perspective, what the hospitals are doing is they're using this NIST cybersecurity framework to understand their risks. And so they've got medical devices throughout their hospital. some which connect remotely. They're going in and evaluating their vulnerability. And then they're figuring out what they need to do to address security risks. And then they've got an ongoing program of measuring the results of their efforts. They're looking at existing devices and new devices. You know, for somebody that has a product or service that's out there that perhaps didn't have the best security, it was perhaps the best when it was manufactured, but it's been out there a long time, it can be very difficult to go back and make that product really secure by today's standards. So I don't pretend to be a technologist, but one thing I do know from having been around it is if you develop products or services, you want to do something called security by design, meaning you want to think about cybersecurity when you're sitting down and designing your product or service so that you can build it into your product and service. Because that way, when you do get to a customer or a regulator that is looking at your security, you can defend the security of your product very well. The other thing I'd point out is when you're talking about security, you have to think about the use case. It's really a different use case when you're talking about a server that's in a controlled environment versus a device that is in somebody's home, like the Wi-Fi enabled thermostat that I'm thinking about buying, or a product that is run by a battery and is implanted in somebody's body. And it's not a one-size-fits-all. When you're developing something or evaluating something, you have to think about how is this being used? What are the constraints around it? In the case of implanted medical devices, it can be battery life. You know, what is the typical homeowner going to do when they are using a Wi-Fi enabled thermostat or any other number of enabled devices? So what's happening in the hospital world, which would be for everybody else, any other purchasing organization, any other customer, is they've realized the vulnerabilities created by their vendors that are supplying them products or services that access or move their data. And so they are putting a greater focus on that by asking questions at the time of procurement. They are becoming more centralized. If you have a relationship with a customer where you may be buying through a side door or maybe not through their centralized purchasing organization, if your products and services are dealing with data for them, your product is going to be captured by sourcing sooner or later, because these organizations are going through and they're mapping out all of their data handling systems and trying to bring them together under the umbrella of their security organization so that they can get comfortable that one of their vendors or products is not creating vulnerabilities for them. So, as a provider, as a vendor to customers, from our perspective, we are okay with strong security language because we know that our reputation, and at least in our case, our patients are at risk, and we want to do everything we can to secure our products, and we're willing to put that in writing. One thing that, as a rule over 15 years, that as an attorney, what I don't do is I don't agree that my products will not be subject to a breach, because my clients, my employer, is not an insurance company. There's a lot of hackers out there. you can't say nobody will ever breach our systems. What you can say is, these are the security provisions we have. This is what we will do to secure our product or service. And if we don't do it, then we're liable. But if we do it and a hacker from North Korea or Indiana breaches our systems, I'm not going to be liable. That's part of being on the internet. And generally, I've had success doing that in my contracts. As a vendor, you have to look what I call up, down, and sideways. Your customers are going to have security requirements that they're going to expect you to meet. Your regulators are going to have expectations about what security you have to meet. And then if you have subcontractors, you have expectations of what they have to do. And it all has to line up, because your customer is going to say, you have to do this for security, and you have to make sure that your vendors do this for security. Now that's real simple when you have one customer, yourself, and then one vendor. Because you just take what the customer says and you do it, and you say to your one vendor, you better do this. Now think about it if you have 50 customers or 100 customers, and they all want security that's going to protect them. And they're all hitting you at the same time saying, do this, do this, do this, do this. Well, the reality is you can't have a custom security system for every customer. Unless, of course, you're doing a custom business and then you just build it the way they want it. But for most of us, you're going to have one approach to security that's appropriate for your use case. So what I've learned over the years is a couple of things. One, strong security is table stakes. You know, if you don't have good security, you're not going to get the business today. Two, you have to be able to communicate to your customers why what you do is appropriate. And if everybody's using these standards, it isn't that hard because it all lines up. And usually there may be some discussion about different approaches, and that's where this lawyer gets out of the discussion. I have the security professional talk to the security professional, because they very quickly can reach an understanding that, yeah, maybe that's different, but it is adequate security. So even though the customer may have taken a different approach, you can usually get them to agree that your approach is acceptable. And the same thing applies when you are flowing it down to your vendors. What you have to do is be comfortable that what they're doing is comparable or better security to what you're delivering, which needs to be comparable or better than what your customers require. So again, for those of you who don't have products or services that touch your customers' data, these are principles that apply to your vendors. Anybody that's buying products or services that handle data should be assessing their vendor security as part of their RFP process, or when they are considering buying it. Because once you're in bed with a vendor, it's too late. What we're seeing a lot of is information security questionnaires, where maybe we've got an existing relationship and the customer is coming back and saying, wait, we have to up our game, so we're going to ask our existing vendors. So they'll send out pages and pages of questions about security. I don't answer those, believe me. It's our information security specialists. I'll help them understand what the words mean, but they're the specialists. We're also seeing information security agreements, where we may have a customer-vendor relationship, typical commercial terms, but now there's an addendum to it that talks about what we're going to do for cybersecurity. Very comparable to the information security questionnaire. It's just, one is an agreement. The questionnaire, if you mislead your customer on that, well, they'll just sue you for fraud rather than breach of contract. So you need to be careful about both of them. Customers may want the right to audit your security depending on the nature of your business. We try to say we'll have a third-party audit and we'll provide you with a report so that you don't have people wandering through your server rooms. Usually that works. A dozen years ago, it didn't work, so then we started agreeing they could audit, but they were going to pay us a fee for the time we spent, and that suddenly got them more reasonable on accepting a third-party audit. If you're in a regulated industry, you might get caught between and betwixt because your regulators may want something and your customers may want something else. And that's where you just have to have a conversation with your regulators and your customers to talk about the use case. Why is the security adequate for this risk and this use of your technology? And to explain that, well, my regulator requires this. If I can't do that, then I can't sell you the product. And that tends to get the customer to get a little bit more reasonable. So that's my presentation on the commercial nature of cybersecurity.